Hello, everybody. This is Nick Totaro, Professor of Information Technologies, Computer Science, Lakeland Community College. Let's talk digital imaging. This is a topic that really has changed how we do things in life, who we are, how we present things, even how we take notes. Before we talk about digital imaging, let's talk about just photography in general. Right here, I'm holding this little Minolta XG1. It was one of the first big purchases I made as a kid. I bought it like in 79 or 80. It was a couple $100s. And this is a chemical-based film camera, meaning I'd go out and buy a roll of film. That roll of film would have 24 to 36 pictures in it, or potential pictures in it. I'd put it into the camera and I would take pictures. A shutter would open up, light would come in and hit a light sensitive chemical film. When I was done with the 24 or 36 images, I would then take that film, bring it to a processing location, a developer, and they would develop it. Now, that took money and time. A roll of film could be $5 to $7. Processing could be another $10 to $15. So the whole process could anywhere from 10 to 20, $25, depending on how many things. But you were never guaranteed a shot. Maybe you didn't focus it correctly. Maybe the light was too high. Maybe the light was too low. Maybe there was too much movement, so there was blur. So out of 24 or 36 film photos, you might have 20 really good ones. And I've told people this story many times. Between the age of being born and maybe 40, 45, if there's 300 to 500 pictures of me total, that would be a lot. I'm talking school pictures, family pictures, friends pictures, pictures taken at weddings, you name it, maybe 300 to 500 photos. Along comes the 90s and 2000s, and we get into a digital revolution where now we have digital cameras. And one of the things with digital cameras, I'll hold up a little digital camera. This is my my GoPro Hero 10. You weren't restricted by the chemical film anymore. You were basically restricted by really quality and how many photos you can put onto a memory stick. Technology was different. Instead of a chemical-based situation, we have a light sensor in the back of a camera. And again, the shutter would open and light would hit that sensor, and that sensor would determine the quality of that image. And there's where you get into things like megapixels. And a pixel is a single unit of the image. So mega means million, so the more megapixels you have, the better the image quality you have. The early days of the camera were less than 1 megapixel, but as things improved, then we get 2, 4, 12, 24 megapixels. And at each point, that is, we have an individual pixel, and the more pixels, the better the image. Now, let's talk about just the overall size of these files. If I was to take 24 megapixels, each pixel needs to be represented by 3 bytes of information. And I'm going to do some demonstrations on my computer in a second about how they're able to generate so many different colors. I'll tell you right now, 16.7 million potential colors in each individual pixel. And again, I'll do some demonstrations and see how they come up with those numbers. So we have the size of the sensor that determines the quality and the size of the thing. And then each pixel takes 3 bytes. You do some multiplication and these images start getting bigger and bigger. So how can we control the size of the image? And again, we will discuss that. Now, let's start with just looking at maybe what a pixel or potential pixel represents. Well, let me go up to my screen. This is just a simple little Excel spreadsheet. What I did was I basically treated each cell in the spreadsheet as if it was a pixel on an image. So it's a couple hundred pixels by a couple hundred pixels. It's not into the millions of pixels. And if we were to look at this screen, it looks green, but actually there's a whole series of colors. And if you look closely at the screen, you'll see some pixelation, meaning that the pixels don't blur together too much because they're very big. In a typical camera, they wouldn't be this big, but you can see that pixelation. Sometimes in video, digital videos, you see some pixelation because it's just not converting quick enough. But let's take a look at a single pixel. So I'm going to click a pixel at random here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, click a pixel at random. I'm going to go to font and I'm going to go to fill. This is the color that that particular pixel, or really a cell, is being filled with. It's a certain type of green. We just can't say green, but how is that green generated? And where did you say each one of those pixels has a potential of 16.7 million different colors? Well, if I go to this little tab here, just for demonstrations, we get this little color palette. This is the RGB color palette, or red, green, blue color palette. And it's based upon a couple principles. Now, when we talk about the RGB color palette, we can't think of normal colors, colors that we were mixing paints with, where you get the primary and the secondary colors, because green is actually a secondary color when we're dealing with paints. But with computers and digital imaging, we have three colors. We have RGB. Now, they don't really get blended together like we say in pinks, but they're represented by some kind of value. Now, remember, I said that each individual pixel has 3 bytes associated with it. Well, if you read in a book or you saw another video, each byte represents 8 bits. So each pixel is 3 bytes, each byte is 3 bits. And if I bring up the calculator real quickly, we have the potential of 24 bytes. So 3 bytes, 8 bits to a byte, so 24 bits. So if we do a simple calculation here, say 2 raised to the power of 24, there's our 16.7 million potential colors, right? So there's where that number comes from, right? Not a big deal. Let's not worry about the math here. Let's go back to our little RGB palette. Well, you'll notice that they kind of separate these things into these, each one of these is a byte. So the 0-255-0, each one of those is a byte. So there's our 3 bytes. The 0 would be a byte, 255 would be a byte, and the 0. And you'll notice that the green palette is 0255-0. The red is 255-0-0, and the blue is 0-0-255. So what we can look at, and we're going to see this in a second, the first byte of those 3 bytes is the color red byte. The second byte of those 3 bytes is the green byte, and the third byte is obviously the blue byte. Now let's go back to my fill color. And here we have it. We see we have the red, the green, and the blue. You'll notice here that we have numbers. These particular numbers here, those are decimal representations of the numbers. Internally to the computer, we see things as binary. The computer wants to represent binary or display binary back to us as hexadecimal. And that's the value that we have here. So the first byte is 0. So there is the first byte, that 00. The second byte is a decimal of 130, but hexadecimal, it's 82. And then that third byte, that last byte, the blue byte, is a decimal of 75, but hexadecimal 4B. And I could adjust the color by changing those values of those given bytes. Let me do that. And I'm going to make it very, very obvious here. I'm going to change red to 100. All right. So it's going to be a different color green. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change them all to 100 so we can see what color we could potentially get here. So it's kind of a grayish green. If you look right here, here's the old color and here's the new color. And if I say, yeah, that's the color I want, You can see now the fill here is that gray color. And if I do okay, you'll notice that pixel was converted. So there's where each individual pixel requires 3 bytes. The manipulation of those bytes changes the color of that given pixel. As I mentioned, this is an Excel spreadsheet representing pixels. It just looks like a green background, but if I zoom out a little bit, still very pixelated. It is a image of Godzilla and Ultraman. Now, nobody sent me emails saying Godzilla never fought Ultraman or Ultraman never fought Godzilla. I know that. Godzilla was a movies franchise. Ultraman was a TV series. They never fought each other. So I know my stuff here sometimes. But there is what a typical picture being pixelated would look like. Now, excuse me, let's talk about the size of these files. So I'm going to swing this over here. And these are fundamentally all the same photos. So this DSC 00289. They have different formats. And I'm going to open up this one, the AWR. I'm going to close my color wheel. And this is the original Godzilla Ultraman photo that I took with a digital camera. Now, digital cameras can be set, the file format can be set different ways, but one of the file formats you can do with a digital camera is what they refer to as RAW, meaning that it just takes that picture and it looks at every single pixel and puts it there. Now, typically a raw image will tend to be the biggest picture. If you do any kind of digital photography, you want a camera that will be able to take raw because you can manipulate things. Similar to what you may hear with audio files or anything, you can always remove, but you can't add. So your raw is normally going to be one of your bigger files. Now, each camera might have a different raw type format, but that's normally going to be your bigger file format because it's going to carry all that information, and that could get very unwieldy at times. Now, if I close this and I go to a JPEG, it looks like it's the same photo. Sorry about that. Excuse me. It looks like it's the same photo, and fundamentally it is, because when I took this picture with the camera, digital camera, I said save it as both the raw format and save it as a JPEG at the same time. So when I snapped the photo, it actually saved it twice, as raw and as JPEG. And if we were to look at the size difference here, the raw is at 24 megs. And the JPEG that it created was 7. So almost 4 times the difference. How did that get compressed? How did we go from 24 to 7? Well, we don't want to be creating, if you're not a digital photographer, you're just taking photos for your own sake, having those very, very large raw files may be unproductive. Now, if you're a photographer and you're doing some digital imaging, you may want that raw so you can work with. But for most of us, a simple JPEG will work. You'll notice that I have other formats too. I have JPEG spelled with an E. It's the same thing. I just basically did some conversion. It just shrunk it down a little bit more. Then we have PNG and TIFF, and you notice that PNG and TIFF are much bigger than the original RAW. Couple reasons why. One is that RAW is a special RAW for the camera I use. It's coming from a Sony ZV-10, and that's Sony's format for their RAW. When I converted it to a PNG or a TIFF, it really exploded it out. It took all that particular information and it exploded out versus compressing it. When I took it and I compressed it to the JPEG, it made it very small. That is because images, they like to compress things, not to have these unwieldy images. And generally speaking, there's 2 types of compression. There is no loss compression, where when you compress it, it will take and look at certain strings and just kind of compress them together and do some algorithms, but you never lose anything. And that's what PNG and TIFF tend to do. They don't lose any information. But when you convert it to a lossy type compression algorithm, it looks for stuff that doesn't really make a difference in the picture. It may begin to blur colors. If you have two slightly different shades of green, it may get rid of one green and just keep that consistent. So we tend to lose stuff when we look at JPEG. Now we don't lose stuff in that great of quality. Now if you're a professional photographer, you could be losing quality there, but for the average individual, the difference between a RAW and a JPEG should not be that significant. So that's why we see the original RAW and then the original JPEG 24 megs versus 7. But when I converted it to a PNG and a TIFF, it really exploded out because it took every piece of information and had to convert it to PNG or TIFF, and that's where it got very large. When I exported it to a JPEG with an E, it was able to compress it down and look at stuff and say, you really don't need these different types of they're so close, we don't need them, and we can compress that much more or better. Well, let me use a tool here I often use in different videos to show you the inside of a given file. This tool is called Hex Workshop. It allows me to open up files and look at the actual, not quite binary, but the binary of those files. And that binary gets represented as hexadecimal. Now, just kind of an FYI here, let me see if I can scroll this all the way up. So we start to 0. I know I'm going very fast. The scrolling up is going very, very fast. Okay, just kind of FYI here, these first 4 bytes, or actually first 2 bytes, this FFD8, that distinguishes this file and says this file is a certain type of file type. If I go down here, I think this is the JPEG file. Yes, it's the JPEG file. So that tells that. That has to deal with forensics. If you're interested in forensics, we teach a forensics course here. So anyways, this is the JPEG file that I am looking at. If I was to open up the RAW at the same time, you can see that the starting bits are a little bit different because of the format and stuff like that. If I was to look at the RAW, you'll begin to notice there's a lot of just stuff, blank space. Here's 202020, and that's the stuff that could begin to get compressed when it gets converted to JPEG. Compression basically looks for patterns, and if it can take a series of patterns and kind of basically shrink that down. Imagine a situation where you have 10 white pages. So instead of saving all 10 of those white pages, it will save one of those 10 pages and say, do this 10 times. So instead of keeping all 10 pages or all 10 bytes that would be identical, they say this byte is going to be duplicated multiple times. So that's how we can begin to compress things. Also, compression can be based upon getting rid of things that aren't necessarily would affect the quality. You'll notice in this RAW, we get into these zeros. These are padding. That's another way that things get compressed. So if I go back to the JPEG, the JPEG's going to have stuff in there too. There might be some additional areas that are just redundant, but it's already been compressed. Let's review. This is an Excel spreadsheet that's kind of a representation of a bitmap image. Each cell in this, each cell here is a given pixel. Obviously, in this particular example, because I don't have a lot of pixels, the image isn't that great. If I had more pixels, 2 megapixels versus 24 megapixels, the quality is going to be much better. Now, we still have the same color palette. Each one of those pixels has a potential of 16.7 million colors. But because I don't have a lot of pixels, that's where we get the pixelation. When we look at the size of the file. A camera normally can take in what they call into their RAW format or into a JPEG. The RAW it's taking a picture of everything. All right, there may be some blank spaces in there, but each pixel will be unique in that RAW. When we compress it, it looks for areas of redundancy or areas that are close enough that we can say, we don't need to have these exact two, these two greens are just enough that we can treat them both the same. So we compress that. We look for redundant data. We take 10 pages and say, instead of saving all 10 pages, we save one page and we say, multiply this by 10. And we can see the different file size that would be associated with it. So as you're working with your camera, and what's really been amazing is that we're now putting cameras into our phones. Let me wrap things up here. We're now putting cameras in our phone. I remember I said 0 to 45, there's maybe 300 to 500 pictures of me. I might take 500 pictures literally in a week sometimes. I remember in the beginning of this video, I said, this technology has basically changed who we are. We're constantly taking still photos here. I use my camera, most of the time I use my camera for almost note taking. Yes, I take pictures of important events. I don't have to carry and lug this thing around and pay for film. I can shoot hundreds of photos and just choose the ones that I want. But it's changed the way we've done things. We all carry, or most of us carry, these smartphones around, so we're constantly taking pictures. I use this phone for note taking. There are times where maybe I can't see everything on the screen, so I take a picture of it. Or maybe I'm out shopping or doing something, an errand or something, and I see something and maybe I say, well, maybe my wife might be interested in that. I'll take a picture of it and I'll send it to her. And when we're done, we just delete those photos. So it's really changed. The concept of having these digital cameras has changed how we live and how we do life. First 45 years, 500 pictures. Next 15 years, thousands and thousands and thousands of pictures. I've taken thousands of pictures. I always open up my phone here. The quality of your digital image is still going to be based upon the lens. The lenses are still very, very important. But then how big those pictures are, how many pixels will fit in a picture. You saw with my spreadsheet that when I only had a couple hundred pixels, it was very pixelated. But if I have millions of pixels, it's going to be a much better image there. So a lot involved with digital imaging. And again, this particular video is more about that introduction about how this is done and how these things are stored and then the file size and things like that. If you're interested in digital photography, the school has a very good digital photography program, and I would strongly encourage you to look into that. But that being said, let's go out and learn something.